We will call this finance hearing to order. And good afternoon again. Thank you for joining us for our final operating budget hearing. Starting December of last year through today, Council has held 10 committee-themed operating budget hearings that discuss appropriations and priorities that reflect the city's current needs and challenges. I am grateful to my council colleagues for leading those conversations, and I'm grateful to the department leadership and our community partners for joining us in those conversations. Over the last few weeks, my office held a series of conversations with the administration regarding the proposed budget, council's priorities, and that council's priorities, were not represented in the proposal and the potential ways to fund those gaps. And I want to be clear that the goal of this hearing is to have a conversation about the administration's philosophy when crafting this budget, the budgetary questions that will still remain after passage, and what council has chosen to prioritize in short terms as we approach passage. And I want to be clear, I want to thank Director Long, as well as the mayor, for presenting a budget. These are challenging times that we are in. And as I said from the beginning of this, that the mayor's office proposes the budget. It is now with council to look at that and evaluate it, to come to an understanding, to make sure that it balances, I think, delivering what our core is, which is basic city services, but also addressing community and emergent needs and making sure that the priorities of this council are reflected in it. So I want to thank Director Long, as well as the mayor's administration, for those conversations that we've had to get us to this point today. Before I move forward in the hearing, I want to thank, first of all, my colleagues for being here. Are there any opening remarks from any of my colleagues? All right. Council President? Yes.
Sure. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, for your leadership and your stewardship of this budgetary process. It has been an active and deliberative process, one during, again, a tough budget process. So I really do appreciate it. When council negotiated last year's budget, which finished out in the red by only $1.5 million, I said that this was the tightest budget that I had seen in recent history, in my time being in this building. Then we received this year's budget. And while it includes several $1 million in surplus carryover, it actually is even more challenging because the scale of the community priorities that it underfunds, these are priorities that I believe both the City Council and the administration share. In 2025, the city's income tax revenue, the primary source of income for the general fund, grew by more than 6% over the previous year. And that's incredible. Other cities would be envious of Columbus's ability to grow that much year over year. It's one of the best years we've had in the last decade or so. But given that, you would think that we'd be well positioned going into 2026. But we are not. And that's because there are some structural long-term financial realities that we as a city have to reckon with and be honest with. Like households themselves, our costs are going up. Our one-time monies from the American Rescue dollars or ARPA dollars are gone, and we're spending too much money, both what we budget for and, truthfully, what we don't budget for, we have to end up covering. And we're dealing with all of this at a moment where the federal and state government are also cutting funding that supports our city and community partners' needs. So we are in a moment where we have to make tough choices. And what concerns me is that instead of addressing them head on, we are robbing future generations by kicking the ball down the road. For example, last year, council had to pass a bunch of ordinance to move money around to help departments make payroll. And we did that in part by taking money from the income tax set-aside fund, which has a 4-time multiplier reduction on our capital budget. And this is the second year in a row that the proposed budget doesn't invest in the 27th pay period. That is a bill that is coming due no matter what. So what is true is that we don't have all the answers today, but families in Columbus have to make choices every day to live within their means, and so does the city of Columbus. What I know is that we can't begin to solve problems if we don't name them. And this is what our fiduciary responsibility as council is to do, is to see how we can work together with the administration to meet this challenge. So thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to the administration, and thank you to all our partners for being here.
Thank you, Council President, and just echo those things of, this is why we're here today, to have this, I think, joint conversation, because these are challenges that we do have to face head on. And so thank you, Council President, for those remarks. So again, with us tonight, we do have our Finance and Management Director, my partner in good, as I call him, Chris Long, as well as our Director of Council's Legislative Research Office, my other partner in good, Mr. Matt Erickson, who is with us today. Director Erickson, I know that you and your team have conducted a very thorough analysis of this year's budget, as you do every year for Council. Can you just provide us a synopsis, and I'll turn the floor over to you because I know there's a presentation of the 2026 proposed budget compared to the approved 2025 budget, and of course, I think we'll get into some amendments later as well.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Bankston, Council President, members of Council. I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to come before you again twice in 1 week. Not often I get a chance to do this. Chair Bankston, as you pointed out, I do have a staff and legislative research office that has been evaluating the budget since it was submitted really in mid-November. Having gone through the 10 budget hearings, having spoken with departmental staff, community partners, interested parties throughout, we want to talk a little bit about how council generally perceives this budget and how we're considering it for amendments. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the circumstances in which this budget was originally formulated. I'm going to talk about how it aligns with some of those needs that I mentioned that we're hearing again from departments, from community partners, some of the ongoing funding challenges that remain that sort of demonstrate the need for us to stay involved in the process throughout the year as we continue to encounter some additional challenges. And then I think I'm going to turn it over to you, and then we'll come back and talk about some of the amendments. So let me first talk a little bit about the circumstances that predicated this budget. We are experiencing the same thing that many other major cities around this country are experiencing. Notably, it is the loss of one-time federal dollars that are driving a lot of the deficits that you're seeing in other major cities. We find ourselves in the good fortune of having income tax growth in excess of 6% in 2025 and not needing to take the kind of drastic measures that you see sort of demonstrated up here with some of these other cities. You do have plenty of major cities are enacting layoffs that are tapping rainy day funds that are getting, you see New York City getting $1.5 billion from the states to fill their gap. This is fortunately not something that Columbus has had to consider. At the same time, other cities in Ohio, our own neighbors, are facing very similar challenges. You see that in Cleveland. Basically, all the cities that we're looking at, all the major cities, all our peer cities, are kind of looking at the same circumstances where they're looking at belt tightening. They're looking at years of these federal dollars that buoyed budgets and kept a lot of staff on payroll have now disappeared. The city of Columbus had to spend the overwhelming majority of our funds that we received from the feds by the end of 2024. And so those dollars really kind of disappeared last year that's when we really started to see the impact of it. And to a degree, it's sort of coming home now for the 2026 budgets. Cincinnati, same sort of situation. Cincinnati enacting 2% cut in many situations for most of their departments, and they're still projecting a significant deficit through the end of next year. And then Toledo having to tap their own rainy day fund in order to close their gap. They're also evaluating certain revenue enhancements. I know they're discussing an admissions tax. Cities' admissions tax goes to support the arts, but many other cities, this is nothing that Columbus is considering, but many other cities use it for general operating support, and that is something that Toledo is actively considering in order to continue to try to close the gap that they're facing as well. In terms of what it is that is most profoundly affecting the city of Columbus budgets, it's really can be boiled down to a few different things. One is the reality that costs are rising just like everybody else. That's for the last several years, we did experience significant inflation, and that drove costs a great deal higher. You can see there that costs for professional services, by the way, just want to throw a caveat, pretty much everything that I'm going to mention today is germane only to the general fund. The operating budget is 3 ordinances that council considers every year, but council has already passed what we call the other funds and select other funds ordinances, and so really we're talking about the general fund here, and most of my references will be to general fund expenditures. Professional service costs have risen by 20% in the last 5 years. At the same time, material and supplies costs have risen by over 50% during the same period. Again, noting that one-time money is gone. That was $400 million between the CARES Act, at least $400 million between the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. Those were dollars that, to a very large degree, the city had effectively converted to revenue, and so it had treated just like other standard revenue dollars, and so that revenue has disappeared. We are no longer receiving it. And in addition, the biggest cost driver, obviously the biggest cost driver for the city at all times is going to be staffing. I think it constitutes more than 80% of our general fund expenditures. And we have seen, we are currently working under contracts with a handful of our bargaining units that were adopted a couple years ago and contained far more generous contract increases than had traditionally been granted, on the order of usually 5% a year, when in years past we would have been seeing situations where you'd see cost of living allowance increases of 3% or 4%. In an inflationary environment, obviously contract costs went up. But then the city's headcount has simply been growing. We've added about 412 full-time positions to the general fund since 2019. So it's the personnel, it's the people that drive our costs. We have a lot of people, and they are creating a crowding out effect with our budgets. By the way, please feel free to stop me anytime. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep yammering. Okay, so now I want to talk for a moment about sort of how this budget, what we heard about this budget between talking with community partners, between departments, and where we feel like there are probably some budgetary obligations that are simply missing, underfunded or missing. We've talked about some of these. We've addressed one of these already, but obviously the funding to Community Shelter Board and the homelessness support system overall has fallen dramatically from 2025 to 2026, when there was over $12 million that was provided to Community Shelter Board through basic support, and currently projected about $5.5 million in total. This is at a time when the point-in-time counts for Community Shelter Board, the metric by which we evaluate sort of the scope of the homelessness issue, both the those in shelter and those residing outside of a shelter, has not improved. In some cases, gotten worse. Community Shelter Board has made it clear that there is a need for additional resources to address that issue. The Columbus Promise Program for associate's degrees at Columbus State for Columbus City school students, no funding contained in the budgets for that at all. Obviously, Council in January amended the general fund budget and then retabled the budget prior to passage, but amended the general fund budget to add $2 million to the Office of Education's budget to sustain that support for Columbus Promise Program and keep it moving. The Recreation and Parks budget, we always sort of say that in terms of those city staff that residents should encounter and come into contact with on a regular basis, it's probably going to be public service and hopefully recreation and parks, probably less so public safety staff, but we would obviously like recreation and parks to be one of the front doors for the city, and the 2025 budget contains far fewer resources for the departments compared to last year, as well as significant number of reductions in personnel that provide programming. We are seeing reductions in the public safety budgets. That includes effectively no firefighters that would be deployed this year. There are no firefighters that are expected to start at the Fire Academy until December. So effectively, the Fire Academy is unlikely to turn out any recruits in 2026. That becomes problematic from a staffing perspective, as I will get into in just a few minutes. But in addition, this budget eliminated the cadet program, which was a pipeline for some of the more potentially vulnerable recruits to find a career in public safety. We hear a lot of concerns about the reduction in human services support, and we sort of collate that into support for the federally qualified healthcare centers. So we're talking about Primary One mostly. There was $1 million reduction for Early Start, the city's pre-K program. The Elevate program, which I know what's next on Mark's list to do. Pardon. The Elevate grants were reduced by $1 million. This is going from $10 million to $9 million. This is the city's primary mechanism for grant making to nonprofit organizations. About $5.5 million or so comes from the general fund. The other $3.5 million will come from the hotel motel fund. But that's a traditional amount of $10 million has been reduced to $9 million. In addition, there's been a 15% across the board reduction to all discretionary grants. Some of these go to nonprofit organizations from departments. Some of them go to other community organizations that are not necessarily human services related. And then we obviously heard quite a bit, especially during the public safety hearing, about the deleterious impact that this budget is going to have to court operations, going so far as potentially curtailing all third shift activities and potentially looking at some pretty inconvenient experiences for those who may be utilizing the court system, City of Columbus. In terms of what we consider to be some of those remaining outstanding challenges that we want to ensure that we keep an eye on, it's important to note that this budget is even more challenging, as a council president was noting about how the 2025 budget was challenging, and then we got this one. That's absolutely true. The reality is that we ended 2025 with less money than we were expecting, and we spent more money than we were expecting. It really can be kind of summed up as simple as that. We had a situation where we were expecting about $20 million fund balance at the end of the year. Ended up being about $15 million year-end fund balance in the general fund. And then the projected lapse, the amount of money that was going to go unspent in the general fund, had a slight overage, just under $2 million. But in addition, obviously, everybody knows that we incurred significant costs associated with remedying the data breach, and so the cost necessary for that in terms of additional personnel that need to be onboarded, additional contracted services that were required. And then at the end of the year, as Council President alluded to, we had to make some efforts to shore up payroll because of some of the unexpected public safety overages associated with the unbudgeted expenses associated with recruits. So we're left with a budget where we have tremendous concerns about some of the outstanding obligations that the city may face, for which we're not confident that there is sufficient available appropriation to cover these expenses. Most notably, police and fire overtime. The budgets for police and fire overtime were reduced for 2026. Police and fire overtime did fall notably last year. I think the Public Safety Department, especially with police, was able to achieve almost a 25% reduction in overtime, a lot of that due to elimination of second day overtime. But the reality is that overtime costs are likely going to significantly exceed what is currently budgeted. One contributor to that is going to be Fire Station 36, which is set to open imminently, and for which it's estimated that there are not a sufficient number of uniformed staff that can staff that station without incurring significant overtime expenses. In addition, we are still looking to remedy an issue with the weekly recycling service provided through the Rumpke contracts. As submitted, the budget contained an estimated use of about $5.5 million from a funding source that was ultimately ineligible to support that contract. And so at the moment, we're awaiting a solution to essentially fully fund that contract and ensure that weekly recycling service can continue for residents. What we colloquially call the jail contract, the funding that we pay to the sheriff's office in order to incarcerate residents of the city of Columbus within the Franklin County Jail. That's on a per diem basis. Traditionally, those expenses are probably somewhere between $1.5 and $2.5 million a year. There's only about $1 million budgeted in the public safety departmental budget for that. I think we all collectively have concerns about collective bargaining agreement negotiations. We do have 4 unions that will be in negotiations this year: FOP, IAFF, AFSCME, and CWA. And the amount of funding set aside to potentially compensate for any ultimate settlement that comes from that contract negotiation is hopefully sufficient. But potentially one of the biggest problems is the necessary attrition. That while this budget did eliminate, I think, hundreds of vacant general fund positions, there is still a need to achieve a level of attrition to ensure that the city doesn't exceed its budgeted obligations, doesn't exceed appropriations, in particular for personnel. Lastly, the last thing that I'll note that has given us some concern about the nature of this budget has been, as the council president noted, first, that's over-reliance on the income tax set-aside, or what we call the ITSA. And the ITSA is the mechanism, for anybody who doesn't know, it's the mechanism by which we repay our general obligation debt. So this doesn't pay for public utilities debt or other enterprise debt, parking, mobility options, that sort of thing. It pays for the rec centers and playgrounds and sidewalks. And it does have effectively a 3-to-1 as a treble effect. So $1 out of the ITSA can support $3 in debt financing, essentially. And so when we place operating costs onto that fund, such as the $25 million. It's currently budgeted for tipping fees and to support a portion of the recycling contract, then we are effectively reducing our capital capacity by about $75 million. It's not 1-to-1, it's not quite that simple, but that is a way that we can look at it. And then the last item that I think the Chair Bankston, I apologize for this, Chair Bankston, the Council President, mentioned the 27th Pay Period Fund. 27th Pay Period Fund, we will not invoke until 2032. This is, the city pays 26 paychecks a year. We will incur a 27th, because of quirks in the Julian calendar, we'll incur a 27th paycheck in 2032, but that's a cost that the city obviously realizes from an accounting and budgetary perspective. Right now, there's about $14 million in the 27th Pay Period Fund, and the last time it was utilized, it required about $28 million, $28.5 million of expenses. It will be significantly more than that when we have to utilize it again in 2032. But given that we deferred a deposit to the 27th pay period last year, and that there's no set aside for it this year, and we typically look for about $3 million a year in order to achieve a sufficient balance. We would be going into 2027 needing to make a $9 million deposit in order to effectively catch up to where we needed to be. And then last, in terms of the rainy day fund, the council had approved a resolution to achieve a fund balance of about $114 million by the end of next year. so that's 2 years, we had established a goal of $114 million. Right now, there's about just under $107 million cash in that fund. That fund does accrue investment earnings, interest earnings, and the balance will increase, assuming that there is ongoing positive market activity. But there is the potential risk, absent an additional deposit at some point over the next 2 years, there is an additional risk that we may not meet that target fund balance by the end of 2027, which is a goal that we set for ourselves. But as we very commonly discuss around here, some of those goals have broader implications, such as how we're perceived by ratings agencies when the time comes for us to issue debt. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I think I'm coming back in a few moments to discuss amendments, but I'm happy to answer any questions council members may have.
Thank you, Director Erickson. I know that I think our Finance Director will address some of those as well in his comments. One thing I think that still sticks with me is that, we are at a place, I think, as a city that we have I don't want to say luxury because we are in, I think, clearly austere times, but we're at a place where we have the ability to have a conversation about how do we get ahead of this. And you clearly pointed out some other peer cities and even cities in Ohio that are also having these type of budgetary climate that we see ourselves in. Can you talk about what some of those other cities are doing, have done, and thinking about us here, some things that we should be looking at as well?
Certainly, Chair Bankston. As a finance and budget person, I hesitate to put recommendations out there for council members to ultimately consider and adopt. But those cities, as I mentioned, some of the major cities have been looking at revenue enhancements. They've been looking at ways to raise additional revenue, but you've also been seeing messaging from a lot of those cities saying this is not supposed to be a revenue problem. This realistically should be an expenditure problem. And so you are seeing a lot of those cities that are enacting layoffs, that are enacting furloughs, that are enacting hiring freezes, that are enacting COLA freezes until circumstances improve.
Thank you for that. And I just raised that because I think it is not to say that we don't take this moment seriously, because we should. But when we see things like $1.5 billion subsidies going back to places like New York, or I think $35 million deficits at our friends in Cincinnati, it does at least let us know that we have, I think, the opportunity here, I think, to work together to get ahead of that. You mentioned something as well. So thinking about what some other cities had done, even tapping their rainy day fund. What is the status of our rainy day fund? I think you went over that in the conditions. What conditions would trigger us to have to tap that fund?
Sure. Let me just reiterate it again. So our rainy day fund has, I think, just a little under $107 million cash balance right now, with a target balance of about 114. I think it's actually $114.1 million by the end of next year. There are no codified principles around the use of the rainy day fund. The city does not currently have a policy in place that says this effectively triggers the use of the rainy day fund. It's one of those, I think, we know it when we see it. Obviously, the last time it was utilized was during the Great Recession, when it was largely emptied. But at the moment, we do not have protocols or principles about the use of rainy day.
And I think, as we've talked about this, Director, that is like do not break breaking only in case of an emergency, right, type of glass situation. And I think there's other things that we would try to do before getting there, because you alluded to this around our credit rating and how that plays into that. And that leads me, I think, to ITSA. I think you referred to that as well. ITSA is, yes, absolutely how we pay our debt service, but if you could just remind us as well, there are other parameters that we put around borrowing debt that are just simply, right, what's available in ITSA, but there's other constraints that we've put around our debt, around debt coverage ratios and those other types of things that really go into that formula.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that. Councilmember, I think you're probably referring to, for example, the SIT analysis that the auditor's office and that finance maintains. And Councilmember, what you're also alluding to with the coverage ratio is the fact that, so just a really quick primer, probably mostly for non-council members, but 25 cents of every dollar that we receive goes into the income tax set aside. That 25 cents is used to service our outstanding debt. There's a spreadsheet, there's a form that essentially says, here's all the city's outstanding obligations. Here's everything that we have to pay off over the next 10 years. Here's also assumptions about how much debt we're going to issue in those out years. Here's assumptions about our interest rate that we're going to have to pay. All of these assumptions have been getting worse over the last few years. Really nothing Columbus specific. They're really all headwinds from broader national trends. But interest rates have risen. Our ability to issue debt has fallen correspondingly. The biggest sort of break on the use of the SIT is that coverage ratio that says that in any given year in that SIT analysis over that time-defined period, we have to bring in at least 1.5 times the amount of revenue necessary to pay the outstanding debt that we have. We also have to have at least 150% of the revenue going into the SIT that's needed to pay that debt service. And that really is sort of considered, a line that we won't cross, especially when it comes to those ratings agencies. I think that's something that they absolutely look for from a financial management practice. And that's really what inhibits it. Otherwise, we did some code changes a couple years ago on the SIT and to a large degree removed any further restrictions on it with the waterfall for how that funding flows in. First, the city, one of the code changes that we made is to ensure that a dollar does not leave the SIT, the income tax set aside, until it has achieved a balance sufficient to pay our debt obligations. And then that waterfall can kind of, flow into another fund that can be used for operating purposes, which is what we're using for tipping fees and recycling.
Thank you. And I just bring it up because it shows that, we have put these kind of parameters in place and we know how to do this. And also just to clear point out, it's not, that every quarter goes in there. There's still that other buffer that we self-impose on ourselves to ensure that we're not just simply borrowing more than we can pay. And that's why that buffer is there. So I'll pause there because I could go into the weeds all day about different financing mechanisms and all of that. But I do want to open up the floor to my colleagues for questions for Director Erickson before we move on to Director Long, or folks can jump in after.
Chair.
President Pocho.
Thank you. Director Erickson, just sort of a level setting question. I think when we're talking about, again, just sort of, when we think about expenses, it's a question of how much money are we bringing in. And one of the difficult things when you build a budget going into a year is you don't know how much money from an income tax or other fees, property tax, et cetera, that we're going to come in. But primarily for our operating budget, we're talking about income tax receipts. So when the Department of Finance is working with the administration and all the departments to create their budget, there's sort of a missing piece in all of this is what do we expect to bring in? And I wondered if you could just talk for a minute about the auditor's role in that and sort of how, sort of just very plainly when we think about this being a tighter year, while at the same time talking about, record income tax collection last year and sort of what the expectations are moving forward. That's not something that the administration sets. That's not something that council sets. We rely upon an independently elected official with significant expertise in this area to sort of set that. And I wonder if you could just talk about that process because it has significant implications for literally how much money we believe that we can responsibly spend.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that. Thank you, President Pro Tem Dorrance. Yes, you're absolutely right. The way that the auditor, in her absence, I apologize, I have to speak on her behalf. I'm not speaking on her behalf, but she has traditionally said that it's council and the administration that determine how to spend our money. She's the one that figures out how much we have to spend. So in Ohio, all cities are required to have a balanced budget. That's a bit of a mischaracterization, or at least a bit of a different way to think about it. We don't technically have to pass a budget that equals what the auditor says we're going to spend. The auditor's prerogative technically is actually on an ordinance by ordinance basis, where she certifies that funds are available. Technically speaking, council can pass a $100 billion operating budget, but when the time comes to actually spend that money, that's where the auditor's prerogative usually comes in. To avoid having to do this on an ordinance by ordinance basis, the auditor on an annual basis submits an estimate of available resources for the following year. That it is simply a matter of efficiency for us to foot our general fund budget to what the auditor says is available, so that we don't end up down the road 6-7 months into the year trying to ordain expenses that the auditor says the money simply isn't there. Does that answer your question, sir?
It does, and I think it gets to what Council President was mentioning at sort of the beginning of his remarks about sort of the difficult position I think the city itself found itself in to start this year, in which, again, there was less funds than we sort of anticipated to sort of bring forth in this year. So, you know, if I'm a resident at home and I say, hey, they're passing a budget today or tomorrow or next week or next month, you know, how do they not have, you know, the amount of money that they thought they would sort of at the end of the year? And is that a question of whether or not they didn't bring in as much money as they anticipated, or is that because they spent more than they had intended to, or a combination of both? And again, I know you and Director Long both are smiling a little bit at me about a really seemingly stupid question, but if I'm, again, sitting in the gallery and I hear some of these numbers, I say, well, hey, you know, I've got a checkbook at home, and, you know, I balance this, and, you know, I've got an Excel spreadsheet because I can't read my own handwriting. But I think that's important to start to put some context here, because, again, if we're talking about a situation where we sort of came into this year in a position that we didn't anticipate ourselves to be in merely from our own finances, I mean, there's obviously a lot of other variables and factors that are outside of our control. But that, if I was sitting on that gallery, that would strike me as a little odd.
Yes, sir. I'm happy to respond to that. You know, one of the things that sets us apart, obviously, from something like a household is that we don't ever really know how much money we're going to bring in on a week-to-week basis. And so it is incumbent on the auditor to make an assumption, make some projections about our revenue activity. And I know that she is constantly in contact with our largest employers. I want to say her office regularly contacts the 50 largest employers just to kind of understand the important aspect of that is because the vast majority of the general fund resources that we bring in is income tax. Everything is ultimately tied to labor and employments when it comes to you know, the general fund budget. And so broader trends in employment and labor are going to have an impact on us just from an income tax remittance perspective. And so her having that experience and expertise and being able to digest and understand and interpret both local and national trends and how they're going to affect us and affect the revenue that we bring in is incredibly valuable.
So Director Long, I'm going to ask you a very similar question after your presentation, so you can cheat off Director Erickson or not, if you so choose. So again, sort of going down that similar vein of, again, if I'm a resident trying to really understand the financial position the city is in right now, and you say, we don't really know how much money we're going to have until we have it, and then we sort of, as we get ready to spend money on a weekly basis here at council, we sort of look and say, is the money there? Sort of where we're at. Obviously, this last year and heading into this year, there's been less certainty based upon a number of different factors. So, you know, obviously the auditor is certifying the dollars that are there, but I think sort of a broad question, again, if I'm a resident saying, you know, what is the city doing? What is council doing? What is the administration doing on a regular basis to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a position? And because again, if we're talking about this being a difficult position that many cities are in, I think this sort of is incumbent upon us of like sort of the same old way that we've been sort of approaching this may not be something that's viable as we sort of head into the future. So, you know, if in fact we found ourselves in a difficult position and are having difficulty identifying whether or not we're checking in with potentially departments staying on budget in a difficult year, how do we as council, you know, exert that authority here on a weekly basis? And certainly, how is the administration? And again, I know this is probably a question for Director Long. So I just don't know if you have any like general thoughts about that, because I know this will be a question I sort of direct to him in his presentation.
I mean, I would defer, honestly, to the administration. It is the role of the Finance and Management Department, on behalf of the administration, to keep an eye on finances on a constant basis. Having come from finance myself, there are plenty of exercises that finance does to ensure that that happens. Obviously, the quarterly financial report is, every 3 months, we stop and talk with city departments about showing them, here's how much you've spent so far. You need to tell us how much you're going to spend for the rest of the year. And that obviously gets increasingly specific as the year goes on because of the fact that we operate on a calendar year, fiscal year, and the cadence around which we put our budget together. But there are a number of mechanisms by which we're routinely evaluating our fiscal health. The auditor has a role in this as well with consolidated annual, the annual consolidated financial reports, as well as the year-end reports that finance publishes, the quarterly reports. You want to say something?
Nate, I'll get you later. Don't worry. Do want to pause and throw it back to the chair. I've got some others, but I want to let other colleagues get in.
Thank you, Mr. Council President.
Yeah, can I pick up where I think Pres Pro Tem started in terms of how we ended last year? To your point, it is 100% understandable, predictable that throughout the course of a year, both a city and individuals, things will come up that we didn't budget for, that we have to find a way. I've been around this building long enough to know several years ago we had the basic city service funds where we could look at. We have took to having sometimes cushions in certain areas to solve for things that just come up that we just can't budget for, consider. My question is for 2025, and again, those are when you have a fuller, or what's a cushier budget, when those things come up, it is easy to deal with.
Yeah.
But in 2025, we said it was a tough budget. 2026, it is a tight budget. Were there things in 2025 budget as we rounded out that we didn't budget for that made it even tighter? And if that is the question, like unbudgeted issues, do you feel confident that we have made up those structural issues to stop us from being in that same situation next year?
I think it's fair to say, as I kind of noted on this slide, that we ended 2025 with less money than we were expecting. We had resource constraints when it came to the budget. And probably the biggest driver of that obviously were the payroll deficits that we faced as a function of the unbudgeted public safety expenses associated with recruits that constituted probably about $30 million that was unbudgeted. That's definitely sort of the biggest driver of some of that the year-end payroll issues that we were confronting. Typically, as you're sort of alluding to, Council President, we do have, as all municipalities tend to, we do have these other pots of money that we can turn to that can provide us with some relief. And we're looking at a situation where we have largely exhausted most of those. We went through an exercise last year during last year's budget process to evaluate what we had sort of termed dormant funds, or funds that had been specifically established for purposes that were probably no longer needed, and we ended up squeezing another few $1 million out of those. But some of those other places where where understandably the administration might have built in some additional capacity for some of those unknowns, it's just not really there anymore.
And obviously my point is, so every bump that we hit this year, like last year, we will feel more.
Yes, sir.
In these budgets.
Chair, can I ask a quick follow-up? So when you talk about that payroll expenses, again, having sort of the significant effect of last year, and I just want to sort of point something out as we head from the 2025 budget to the 2026 budget, which makes this a difficult, when you're going into a year such as we are, in which our bargaining units are coming up for renegotiation of their contracts, you're almost building the plane as you're flying it. Because right now in 2025, you had budget certainty as far as what the expectations of those increases were. So in 2025, we knew certain bargaining units were getting X percentage increase across the board. So when we talk about those unanticipated sort of expenses, is that primarily being driven by, or was that primarily driven by overtime, in which I know you acknowledge that, and again, I've talked with Director Long a lot about the different procedures that particularly the Department of Safety has put into place to get a better handle on these. But is that principally where we're talking about that those issues sort of cropped up on?
No. Overtime, even though, again, overtime significantly exceeded the budgeted appropriations, but unfortunately not in a particularly exotic way. It was consistent with our experience. No, it was largely associated with full-time public safety personnel that were onboarded but didn't have corresponding personnel appropriations contained in the 2025 budget.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Green.
I'm sorry, Director Erickson. Can you explain what that means?
Well, it was I think it was determined in the first quarter of last year that there was probably about $30 million worth of budgeted appropriations in the 2025 personnel budgets that were effectively missing. That there were public safety personnel, I think primarily in the recruits, which just because of an oversight, there was insufficient appropriations to accommodate the full year expenditures for 2025 in public safety, given the number of staff that were on board and that were expecting to be onboarded after they graduated from the academy.
If I may, council members, may I address some of
Thank you, Director.
the items here today, if I could? So just wanted to offer some clarifications on a few things, given Director Erickson's testimony. First, I just want to make clear that at no time was payroll at risk. I think what we've heard here today is there was $11.7 million of cost efficiencies that resulted in surplus. There was $5 million in carryover that is presented to council. There were some additional revenue resources as well. So yes, we had some cleanup ordinances that we have to do each and every year, third quarter transfer ordinances that help us get appropriations in the right place. And due to the complexity of last year's budget, we had more complexities in moving dollars around, but at no time was payroll at risk. I just wanted to make sure that was stated. In terms of the under budgeting issue that was just mentioned by Director Erickson and questioned by Councilmember Green, yes, there were certain public safety personnel costs that were under budget in 2025, but those were fully addressed. They were fully caught up, as evidenced by the carryover numbers that I just mentioned. They're fully budgeted for in 2026, so that issue has been addressed. In terms of the staffing issues, the mayor wanted to safeguard each and every funded position. Over 200 vacant full-time positions were stripped from the operating budget, and we're continuing critical hiring only. And the risk that I know the mayor is at the fore is many of these employees do and perform basic city functions, core city services. And so there's a real risk in laying off, let's just say it, positions. In addition to there being a responsibility to our existing employees, removing funded, actual real people from positions could put our social safety net and human services network at further strain. I also want to point out that all of the cost savings measures that were implemented by the mayor in 2025 were addressed with rating agencies, and these rating agencies issued the highest credit rating to the city possible, AAA. So I'll be talking more at length about these in my testimony, but the things that we're doing have been addressed and been given the seal of approval, if you will, by our rating agencies. I just want to talk about that for a second. Every expense that the mayor is proposing to be moved to the income tax set-aside fund is a qualifying expense. And again, moving these expenses to ITSA actually has the effect of reducing the city's debt, which is actually a credit enhancement. It helps us retain AAA. We would rather have a larger capital budget, certainly, but it's a nuance that I wanted to point out. 27th pay period. Yes, 2025, 2026 would not have a set-aside for 27th pay period, but we have 6 budget cycles that we would need to address that. And instead of setting aside $3 million a year, we'd have to set aside 4. And I'm not making light of that. It is an increase, but it's a manageable one. Overtime, agreed. We're optimistic about where we can be for overtime this year, but public safety has performed incredibly well. Director Brashadi, Chief Bryant have done amazing work. 2025 was almost 20% lower than 2024 actuals, and the mayor believes that they deserve the opportunity to continue those improvements in overtime without making more draconian cuts that could impact basic city services and further constrain the city's financial resources. I also want to point out that while there were many difficult choices and some of our community partners have been impacted, the mayor's invested over $25 million additional general fund resources in human services versus 2018. It's a substantial increase. This is beyond COVID dollars. This is beyond grant dollars. These are general fund resources that have been invested in our community partners. Yes, I'll stop my opening statements for now, and I'll move into slides at
Thank
your
you, Director. I think that's a good segue to go into your presentation. I think we can double back and ask some more clarifying questions, not unless there are questions that members have at this point. Okay. Director, have you, and again, thank you, Director Erickson, for your analysis. Again, I think we'll get into some more clarifying questions after we hear from Director Long. So, Director, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Hardin, Chair Bankston, members of council. If I can, no worries. I'll try to move through these quickly. Some of these have been addressed by Director Erickson, especially this first slide. Totally agree with him that many cities are experiencing exactly what the city of Columbus is experiencing. Significant budget pressures, fiscal uncertainty at the federal and state level, rising costs, largely around personnel in terms of wages, health insurance, materials and supplies, and construction materials. Again, Director Erickson outlined what many of our peer cities are experiencing. It's absolutely what we're seeing here at the city. Ours, we've seen as Director Erickson's testimony indicated, wage inflation here at the city. Our pre-COVID bargaining unit wage growth was about 2.9%. Just in 2025 alone, our weighted average bargaining unit increases are about 4.5%. And personnel costs are, 75% of the general fund budget. And insurance costs, as we know, many of our private sector partners and public sector partners are experiencing this, significant increases in insurance rate. Departmental insurance rates are increasing by 19% in 2025. And I know it's hard to see, but that small chart there just indicates how much these have increased over the last 4 years, 9% all the way up to 19%. That's about a $23 million additional cost to city departments. Obviously, there's other inflationary pressures, and we have, as I pointed out, significant growth in our human services support. I mean, these are absolutely investments that we need to make to assist our community partners, but a significant increase in our support of human services. This is just a very quick revenue profile for the city, and the point of all this is to indicate just how much the city of Columbus relies on income tax as one of its primary revenue sources, as opposed to the national average and peer cities. So the city of Columbus, across all funds, the entire operating budget, not just the general fund, is funded by about 36% by income tax and approximately 3% by property tax. That's significantly different than what we see at the national and at the regional level. National level is about 4%, peer cities is about 10%. The takeaway from this is income tax, while we're very fortunate that it's been strong, income tax is highly volatile and connected to macroeconomic indicators. So as the economy does well, income tax tends to do well. As the economy does poorly, it's disproportionately impacted, whereas property taxes are more stable, right? We know our residents are suffering from high property taxes, but they do tend to be a more stable revenue source because there's a triennial, reassessment of property taxes, and we are in a fairly strong real estate market. The budgetary principles that the mayor established for us for the 2026 budget in a year of really very difficult choices was, one, to rebalance staffing. Certainly the mayor understands that personnel is the number one cost driver. He took that and has taken that very seriously, and as in my opening remarks, has eliminated over 200 vacant full-time positions from the city's general fund budget. In addition to that, we are moving forward with a critical hiring only policy. In other words, only the most critical positions that are central to basic city services are to be onboarded. The mayor's office, Department of Finance, and the Department of Human Resources has to approve all those to ensure that we are maintaining a strict discipline with respect to hiring. The mayor wanted us to maintain core city services, ensure that the budget can perform in ways that keep our citizens safe, that keep our public service and refuse operations intact, recreation and parks across the board. One thing, while we do have certainly less financial flexibility and resources that we had in the past, as already been pointed out, COVID era relief dollars are gone. Our basic city services resources are gone. But we do still have a very healthy rainy day fund. We're very close to meeting the $114 million goal, a few million dollars short of that, and the mayor's budget maintains that rainy day fund. There is no contemplated reduction from that fund. The mayor asked us to prioritize safety and stability in preparing the operating budget for 2026. And some of those things include, obviously, funding police and fire classes. Do we wish we had more resources for more classes? Absolutely. Does the mayor wish there were more resources to onboard those classes sooner? Absolutely. But again, in a year of difficult choices, the mayor was able to fit in what he could in terms of addition police and fire classes. I will also point out that overtime and staffing are directly correlated. So the fewer classes that we have, the more we have to rely on overtime. So there's a real push and pull decision to be made around staffing. I know that's why the mayor has pushed for a third class, is to help relieve pressure on the overtime, which we're all concerned about. And finally, the city has adopted a new strategic planning and a new strategic funding platform in 2025 and 2026. What this means is it's a real way that we are now organizing the departmental activities and operations around the key strategic priorities: safety, prosperity, stability. It also has helped us identify redundancies. I think this is a tool that we're going to use in the years ahead to ensure that we're not duplicating efforts across departments. This is something that Chair Bankston and I have talked about, is how do we use this mechanism to help identify inefficiencies, pull together resources, and make the city better and more cost efficient. And so that is another tool that we have brought to bear. Again, here is a one slide on all of the different budget balancing measures that we employed in preparing the 2026, Mayor's 2026 operating budget. Again, removing over 200 full-time positions, shifting qualifying expenses to the income tax set-aside, moving qualifying expenses to other funds like the street construction, maintenance, and repair fund, income tax set-aside, et cetera. 15% reduction to discretionary contracts. Again, none of these we wanted to do or the mayor wanted to do, but were necessary to balance the budget. That did include a $1 million reduction to development Elevate contracts. Bargaining unit increases, we only have 2% budgeted in 2026, but whereas we've been trending more in 4.5% and 5% rate for bargaining units, but if we're able to successfully work with our valued partners in the bargaining units to migrate more towards a 2% average annual growth rate, we think that's a way for us to rebalance staffing going forward. We reduced travel, training, supplies, FF&E, and food and beverage, largely eliminating all those categories except for areas where licensure was required. And again, unfortunately, we had to restructure the CPH, federally qualified health centers contract. CPH has been dealing with a highly volatile funding environment, both at the state and federal level. That's where we were able to pick up some dollars. And then finally, we are, again, through this critical hiring practice, we are counting on some additional attrition in 2026, meaning individuals who separate from the city, from their current position, and we would only be filling those additional vacancies on a critical hire basis only. We believe we can pick up additional savings on that as well. What did the budget include in a really tough year? Again, our 2 police recruit classes, adding up over 120 new officers to the force, 1 fire recruit class, 45. The mayor also included approximately $5 million for resilient housing. Obviously, with the COVID era dollars, ending, a big part of that was emergency rental assistance, which was an amazing resource for our residents. The mayor wanted that to continue in some form, and so we have set aside $5 million for resilient housing to continue keeping our most vulnerable residents housed. Shoring up our cybersecurity, almost $5 million set aside for Zero Trust Network to ensure that our technology infrastructure is safe, and then setting aside additional dollars for the new opening of the Kilbourne Run Sports Park. So while, again, very difficult budget, but the mayor was able to add some notable additions around safety and security and stability. Many of these, I know that Director Erickson did address. 27th pay period, again, we can make that up by depositing $4 million a year over the next 6 budget cycles. Rainy day fund, no intention to tap that. I know one of the things the mayor, again, would like to see, and I think it will have an offsetting effect over time, will be a 3rd police recruit class. Obviously, additional shelter support is something we all care about. And then we've already made some discussions already about safety overtime. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Director. And I think you answered a couple of my questions, but I want to give you some time to talk about really the philosophies around, particularly around budget expansion requests, as well as cuts that were made. And one, how you all came to those. I think you alluded to it a bit around safety there, but thinking about the request that you all got, what was left unfunded, and how you came to prioritizing what was in this proposed budget.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Banks. So the Finance Department received over $128 million of unfunded and expansion requests for the 2026 operating budget. We want our departments to tell us everything that they need. And so it's not uncommon for expansion and unfunded requests to be an extremely large number. Unfortunately, we were only able to fund about 80 million of that. And many of the cost containment and budgetary philosophies that we saw in my slide deck were implemented in order to come up with those dollars, the $80 million that was needed to fund those expansion. About 62 million of the 80 that we were able to fund were public safety related. So the classes, the overtime, in terms of body-worn cameras, we were able to fund those items. The other items were set aside to address the items that we saw on my slide screen, some of the notable additions around Zero Trust Network, resilient housing, and the Kilbourne Run Sports Park. As I mentioned previously, our new strategic planning initiative that was implemented in 2025 is the framework by which all of these expansion unfunded requests were addressed, were critically analyzed. And basically, it's to ensure that everything that we did fund not only met the mayor's priorities, but helped us make a more stable and prosperous fiscal environment.
Thank you for that, Director. And then, and this will be my last question, I'll open up for my colleagues. You mentioned some of the cost containment measures that you all did. What are some of the things that you're recommending in this year that should continue?
Yeah, thanks, Chair Basin. So, nothing really moves the needle like personnel. 75% of the city's general fund budget is personnel driven. So continuing the practice of being very conservative as it relates to hiring, and only in the most critical cases, onboarding vacant positions or even newly vacant positions, I think is critical. Certainly the mayor agrees with that. Rebalancing, right, in terms of staffing is the single biggest, most critical item.
Thank you for that.
Follow up on that?
Yeah, President Hart.
I think what the the chair was getting at, and Director Long, you alluded to not being able to even meet all the mayor's priorities, but needing to do those cost containments to get there. The administration announced last year a hiring freeze. How is that going? Is that working? Is that the primary way that we see ourselves self-correcting? And do we know how much it has saved so far? And is that how we're going to be in a position to get to, say, $4 million for the 27 pay period next year? Like, how do we get back on track?
No, thanks, President Harden. Yes, it absolutely has been a success. It's not technically a freeze, but it's critical hiring only. So there have been some positions that have been onboarded, but those are only items that are critical to maintaining basic city services. And again, all those have to be approved by finance and human resources. It's saved about $16 million as part of balancing the 2026 operating budget, but those savings live on, right? So they move through different budget cycles. We would obviously not have to pay the insurance and wages associated with those in the out years. And I'd also say, Council President, that it also depends a lot on how our bargaining unit discussions go as well. Even obviously for the employees that we retain, negotiating, at least in the short term, lower wage increases can really move the needle as well.
Thank you. I hate to needle on the 27th pay period in particular. But again, we are at the second year where we did not meet the suggested or our self-imposed goal. What makes us think that the next budget, when we're sitting here next year, that we won't even meet the suggested goal at 3 million, but that we would then be able to increase? Would you recommend to council strategies that would get us to making sure that we're not continuing to kick this ball down the road?
No, yeah, thanks, Council President. So just a couple things. One, obviously setting aside 27 pay period deposit in 2026 means a cut somewhere else. And while we have 6 additional budget cycles to figure out the $39 million deposit that we need to have in 2032, many of the other budget decisions that we have are in the here and now. And it's not to say that's not important, but if we're talking about, fire and police classes, if we're talking about supporting our community partners, the decision was that those resources would be better spent now in those areas where we maintain basic and core city services and continue support to our community partners. Do I believe that we could make that up over the next 6 budget cycles? If we continue our austerity measures and make it a priority over the next 6 budget cycles, yes, I do. But it would be a collection of continued efforts that allow us to get there. And again, I would just say that we've been depositing $3 million a year. What this would mean is we would need to bump that up to $4 million a year. So it's not that we weren't depositing any dollars. We were depositing 3. Now we'd have to ratchet that up to 4 over the next 6 budget cycles. So it's an incremental increase of $1 million a year that is, in my opinion, able to be addressed. Thank you.
And the only reason that is a concern for me, Director, is that, again, we are in this situation that we are in this year when we grew by 6%, and all those cities that we looked at or talked about, they would be so envious to be in a 6% growth status. What concerns me is that we're kicking things down the road, expecting sunnier days, when we had a pretty damn sunny day when it came to what we are bringing in. And that just concerns me. And I want to think as we talk through this budget process around how do we, what safeguards can we put into place that makes us live within our means when we, because this bill is coming due.
No, I appreciate it, Council President. I would agree with that. And I believe that we are. And I believe that the cost containment measures that the mayor has implemented is putting us absolutely on that path.
Any questions from my colleagues? Councilmember White. I'm sorry, I saw his hand first.
Thank you. It's nice to be close to do that. Director Long, thank you for being here and providing that overview. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, Director Erickson mentioned one of the challenges that the city was facing was this rising expense for professional services. Does the administration see that as a problem? And is that something that is planned to be addressed?
Thanks, Councilmember Weiss. Appreciate the question. Absolutely. I mean, all of our cost increases are problematic. It's the balancing of all those needs I know that we're all here to talk about. But absolutely, professional services cost increases are taking us away from being able to fund other priorities. But it's absolutely a concern, and I think that's, again, the focus of cost containment measures. How do we eliminate as many inefficiencies? How can we get better at doing our job? I mean, one of the things that eliminating these over 200 positions has done is we're, in addition to, unfortunately, asking our community partners to do more with less, the mayor's asking departments to do more with less. Over 200 positions being cut is significant, and it's not, pushing this off for another day, but trying to address those needs immediately.
I appreciate you saying that and bringing that up. In terms of doing more with less, what controls is the administration putting in to essentially restrict departments from hiring consultants for work that could be done by employees that we currently have on the books?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, for starters, the reduction to discretionary contracts was a good start. The second is that going forward, all of those professional service contracts are going to be approved by the mayor's office. And so it's to ensure that there's not redundancy, right, in hiring multiple consultants that may be doing more or less the same type of work. And I would say that's also a focal point of the new strategic planning software that we're getting ready to onboard, and it's part of that process. It's visibility around all the different work that the departments are doing. How does that align towards the North Star of the city and ensuring that we're not duplicating efforts to get to the same place. So, eliminating unnecessary expenditures.
Gotcha. And so I guess the administration would then be requiring departments to give a reason for why consultants were used and not city staff. Is that kind of the thinking going forward?
Yes, sir. That would be the thinking.
Appreciate it. And then as you just look across departments, across divisions, the duplication between multiple HR departments across divisions, is there a plan to kind of centralize more things so that we can see the cost savings? Because it does kind of seem confusing at times where departments are hiring the same job in a different division, which could essentially be done by one central division controlling that.
Yeah, Councilor Weiss, thank you. One of the initiatives that is moving forward in 2026 is taking a look at a more of a federated model. Exactly what you're saying is how to duplicated efforts across departments, whether that be human resources, technology, fiscal operations. How can those be streamlined so that we don't have multiple individuals doing more or less the same job? It's not that those individuals would be eliminated or positions would be eliminated, perhaps through attrition, right? As part of a larger rebalancing effort, those redundancies can be eliminated. So yes, that is being looked at.
Appreciate it. Chair, just a couple more questions. So one of the things I did not really see in any of the presentations around utility costs, right? If you talk to the department, they talk about just rapid cost increases for utilities. Everyone is experiencing that. Have we done the upfront analysis to understand where we could make upfront capital expenditures that over the long term reduce our utility costs? Is that something that the administration is even considering? I mean, I love the new soccer field we're about to open. My biggest frustration is it is a very large parking lot that if we were to have solar in that lot, we would probably not have the utility costs around energy for that specific project.
Yeah, Councilmember, yes, absolutely. We are looking at a different procurement method for energy efficiency retrofits. This is at the very beginning of the conversation, and it would require not only conversation with Auditor Kilgore, but with all of you. It'd be a different way that we onboard our professional services to do energy efficiency retrofits in city buildings. How do we get better lighting? How do we get better roofing? How do we make our city facilities more cost efficient? There are alternative procurement models and financing models that we believe can be brought to bear to address that. It essentially would mean taking those cost savings that are generated through these renovations and retrofits and using those as debt service pots to help us self-fund these investments going forward. It is in its infancy. I'm glad you asked the question and would love to talk with you more about it. But yes, we are absolutely looking at that. We know that's a concern, and we believe that there's a lot of savings that we can leverage there.
I appreciate you saying that. I think the previous director basically said to a meeting that she didn't believe in sustainability efforts. And it was quite surprising to me, given the concern that we own a lot of these facilities. We will see the long-term savings. So the idea that we wouldn't make those upfront capital expenditures just was kind of disappointing to hear. One more question, just as it relates to refuse, because that was kind of laid out in the presentation as well. Obviously, recycling is important to the long-term financial, economic, and environmental health of the city. Has the administration considered ways of raising refuse funds? Has that been on the table to kind of talk through? Maybe not charging people for trash, but there are other ways to generate revenue for the refuse department. Are those on the table? Is that something the administration is considering?
So, Councilmember, did you have a specific example in mind, or?
I mean, I'm happy to put the example right here on the floor, but I'm sure there will be a whole bunch of phone calls going to the mayor. So if the question is, no, we have not considered that, then that is something I think we should be exploring going forward.
Understood. I mean, we haven't moved in the direction of increasing fees on our customers at all. But we're certainly always open to additional revenue streams to help offset general fund.
I'm excited for that. Phase 2 and phase 3 looks even sunnier as we kind of talk about what that approach looks like.
Yes.
Chair, that's it.
Thank you. President Pro Tem?
Thank you, Chair. Director, I want to just clarify something. I don't want to leave folks with a false impression of exchange we were having earlier about payroll.
Yes.
So this is a little bit of a softball, but again, if folks are watching here, I just want to make sure that, when we talk about that payroll transfer, and sort of the question more is like, where are those funds coming from within the city in order to literally make payroll? We were not in a position in which people were waiting for their payroll checks to bounce or something like that. It was more of a question of legislatively, where are those dollars coming from within the city? How are they getting transferred to where in order for, again, literally those checks to get cut? Because again, I just don't want the impression for folks to leave, well, wait a minute, where we're in a position in which folks were concerned about whether or not literally the city's going to make payroll. It's more a functionality of where those dollars internally were coming from. Is that fair?
Yeah, President Dorans, yes. Each year, the administration puts forth what we call a third quarter transfer ordinance. We do it every year. It's ensuring that surpluses in certain departments are transferred to deficits in other departments. Last year was just more complex because we were going through a whole series of cost savings measures. And so there were some additional steps that we had to take in order to do that cleanup ordinance. But you're correct. At no time was payroll at risk. At no time were employees not going to receive checks. There were just some additional administrative steps that we had to go through. And yes.
Thanks. Follow up, and the council president asked this question, I think, more of a long-term sense, and I think part of what council's really getting at the hearing with certainly you and the Department of Finance and the administration is just, if we keep finding ourselves in this position, 2 years in a row, sort of, we have to take some different approaches, and this is not something that we've had to do in the past because we've had, whether or not that was the Basic City Services Fund where there was additional funds that were there to be tapped sort of when you had those unexpected expenses. It's sort of akin to this savings account that is okay to be used versus the rainy day fund, which we really don't ever want to touch, God willing. So the council president was, I think, asking a lot of questions around the 27th pay period because that is sort of the long-term thing we're sort of staring at. And I certainly appreciate your answer about how sort of the approach is currently, I think, and I want to put words in your mouth, are sort of the cumulative effect over time are what you want to get towards in order for that. That is more of a one in which we're talking about, literally like years in the future, but I want to sort of ask a more immediate one. And maybe the answer is the same. I just want to be able to have both the short-term and sort of the long-term sort of discussion on that. You mentioned in your comments about, this budget contemplates a 2% increase for bargaining unit, members or contracts. So that's what's in here. Sort of what is the approach if those negotiations result in a 2.5% or 2.1%? Just how would you all approach a situation where all of a sudden, again, like we don't have, another piggy bank sitting over here just to cover those costs. It's more of a, how are you going to adjust in an environment in which, we've talked a lot about how the city, literally doesn't know how much money it's going to bring in until it brings it in. And I think in an environment in which the approach clearly has to be different based upon the realities that we're in, if a variable like that changes, and again, just using that as one example, sort of what is that approach internally that you all are taking in order to start to think about, oh, this is a different number than what we had here, and how do we make up for that?
No, thanks, President Pro Tem. We would handle that the way we would handle any cost overrun. In any situation where we budgeted for X and the result is Y, we would have to continue the cost savings measures that we have. We would have to identify additional cuts if necessary. And while we can't count on it, and I'm not advocating that we do, we always look to any additional financial resources that may be brought to bear. We were fortunate enough to have those last year. Again, I fully understand that we can't count on that, but if additional revenue, we were fortunate enough to have that in 2026. That could certainly be a lever that we would pull as well.
And to be fair, those could take a number of different forms, right? The sunny day could be a blistering day in July in which there's, income tax generated, far exceeding what we thought. But again, it's more of the sense of, I guess what myself and I think some council members are getting at, just because we've not been in this position where this is more of an active moving situation where we're thinking about how do we adjust in as real time as we can get. That's sort of the reason for the questions, I think, for us, in which I would love for it to be a blistering sunny day in July as it relates to income tax generation, but maybe it won't be. And therefore, how do we plan for that? How's the Department of Finance and the administration planning for that?
No, absolutely, President Pro Tem. And, as you pointed out, it doesn't necessarily need to take the form of income tax. We do receive some dollars from the state, whether those be, opioid recovery dollars or marijuana dollars. Those can be brought to bear. They have a lot of flexibility around them, so we could use those to fund certain operating expenses. But yeah, those are just two examples.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Green.
Hi, Director. During the first budget hearing, I had asked under the 15% reduction across the board to all discretionary contracts for a list of those contracts, so that way I would actually know what I was voting on before I vote on the budget. Do you have a list of those contracts?
Oh, Councilmember, I don't have a list of those on me tonight, but if those have not been provided to you, we'd certainly send those over.
That would be wonderful. And I'll probably have more questions for that afterwards. I am concerned without the list, because looking at the budget, we have what looks to me at least to be a 23% reduction in rental assistance, 10% reduction proposed to Elevate, a 56% reduction proposed to CSB, a 54% reduction proposed to our federally qualified healthcare centers, and so many more needs that are out there. And so just following the sort of trend, I just want to make sure that I'm aware of the implications of what might be being looked at. I've learned some new information tonight, and I have more questions than I did before. But I wanted to ask a question about the public safety budget. So I think Director Erickson had said something about a $30 million overage. When I was looking at the personnel line items on public safety's budget, it looked like CPD had a $34.8 million overage from the last year's expected. And then CFD had the 18.8, approximately a little under than that, $1 million over. Can you help me understand a little bit more how that occurs?
And so, just so I understand your question, Councilmember, is that related to overtime?
I don't know. It just is the personnel line item from the budgeted amount compared to the projected amount.
For 2025?
For 2025, yes.
Yeah, I believe, Councilmember, that that's related to overtime. I need to do a little bit of digging to see like what portion of that was, wage increases or, insurance increases or overtime increases, because there could be a lot kind of baked in to the personnel costs. But my initial thought is that's overtime related.
And and that's very helpful. Do you feel as if our current projected overtime is enough to account for what we can anticipate this year to see?
Well, thanks, Councilmember, for the question. So there is no doubt that the overtime number that's budgeted in 2026 is optimistic. But it is based in reality in the sense that the public safety, both on police and fire have experienced significant efficiencies in overtime. Again, approximately 20% year over year. And so if they trend in that direction, if they continue to see those types of double-digit overtime reductions, then the number in the 2026 budget, while optimistic, isn't completely out of the realm of possibility. Again, it's aggressive and it's optimistic, but we believe that they've earned the right to attempt to meet those goals. Again, given the real success that they've had over the past several years.
So it's optimistic. If that's the case, then what do you think a realistic number would be? Do you have
No, Councilmember, I don't, unfortunately. It depends on so much. And for me to venture a guess, that would be, not, I think very responsible of me to venture a guess in an area that I'm not an expert. So I would, in my opinion, I would reach out to public safety to give a more, realistic projection.
Okay. So a week or two ago, this is not included in obviously the original proposed budget. Columbus Public Health received notice that they had lost a $1.7 million grant that funds, either partially or fully touches the entire sexual health promotion division, 19 and a half FTEs. Number of positions fully funded on that grant would be about 13 and a half FTEs or 13 and a quarter, I think. This division and the services that are provided under this grant program provides critical life-saving care to 50% of Ohio's HIV population and surveillance for the current syphilis outbreak that we are still experiencing here in Central Ohio, around Ohio. And they work not just here in Columbus, but also they provide these life-saving services across a 9-county region. Have you identified a plan to bridge that $1.7 million deficit for those positions?
No, again, thanks for the question, Councilmember. So that's precisely why we've been using the opioid recovery fund as a backstop to be utilized in the event that Columbus Public Health has these types of grant funding issues. Those are a very flexible resource that can be brought to bear by CPH to, move certain types of programming over to the opioid recovery fund, which would free up operating dollars for them to kind of address these types of shortfalls in whatever level of programming.
Well, while I recognize that they are somewhat flexible in the public health space, and I guess you could make some tangential argument, there are pretty stringent restrictions on what those funds would be used for the purposes of curbing accidental drug overdose and symptoms related to addiction, which certainly there is plenty of work to do in the addiction space as well. We have had a lot of outreach by community providers, when we're looking at making funds to external contracts or potential funds to our Elevate program or potential reductions to our federally qualified healthcare centers. While they are not City of Columbus employees that receive benefits from us, we are funding those positions. That work is our responsibility, and then the people that receive care through them are our responsibility. I value and appreciate your emphasis on human services in your presentation, but it's my perspective that narrative is not reflective of the current reality for what we should be investing, especially at this time while we know that resources are more scarce than ever. So I look forward to working with you. It's music to my ears to hear the city talk about how we can reduce duplication of services coming from a field where that's often their critique of us, even though, we don't know what organization X compared to organization Y is applying for on the other side of town. It's the funders that are the ones that are making those decisions. So I'm going to pause there, but I do have other questions, but I'll just.
Yeah, if I could, just Councilor, just to your point about FQHCs, the city did, and Primary One is an amazing partner that does amazing work. I just wanted to point out that the city has reorganized their lease structure, both at the 1180 East Main Street and 1906 Parsons Avenue. We've renegotiated those leases. We've lowered those lease payments. So over the next 4 years, provided about $655,000 worth of, budgetary relief to Primary One. something that we obviously did outside of the budget, understanding that there were some cost and funding reductions in FQHCs this year. We were also, again, they do amazing work. We were able to assist them through a really difficult time. The mayor was in 2024 when they were having some issues addressing payroll. Mayor approved about $700,000 in additional funding to help them address that. So the mayor absolutely does consider them a key community partner and is doing we're doing what we can to help them.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, and I would just encourage, you know, I would love to partner with urgency, an exploration of as many more solutions as we might be able to find while we know our budget is limited, but are there ways that we can invest strategically in offsetting costs, like through lease agreements if they're in city-owned buildings, or utilizing capital funds to reinvest in, you know, organizations that that serve our most vulnerable residents at a time when they're becoming more and more vulnerable. You know, the economy is tanking. Everyone is feeling the push. You know, people are struggling to keep a roof over their head and food on the table and their utilities paid. And so I recognize they're not all problems we created, but I do fully believe that if we are not part of creating a solution, then we are part of the problem. And so I'm excited to look for some of those creative opportunities with you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I know that our council president has to step out, so he asked to make some remarks before he left. But I just wanted to underscore something. When we think about that grant that was just cut to Columbus Public Health, for instance, right? I believe a state grant or federal grant. There are a lot of grants throughout the city, and I think that I don't want to miss this moment that in addition to what we are dealing with internally, that we are trying to wrap our arms around, we are also operating in an environment that we have a hostile administration in Washington, as well as our state house. So there will continue to be cuts, and we should know that. And the unfortunate part is that no city in America who has the best fiscally managed city in America will be able to fill those gaps. So I do just want to make sure that we make that point clear, because it is not missed on me that there may be another grant that is just seemingly pulled from us that is critical services that are being offered that are paid for through that grant. And so I just want to make sure I clearly state that we're dealing with two environments here, one internally that we need to focus on, but also external pressures given the environment. And with that, Council President, I'll let you go.
That's fine.
Sure, Councilmember, just because I have to run, I apologize. Because even on that point, so one, thank you so much. I hope that, and we're in the middle of this hearing, I know that what comes next after the final, or other questions and comments from conversations from my colleagues will be council's priorities rolled out. But two things stand out to me throughout this process. One is that the amendments that we will put forward help to get, certainly represent council's priorities, helps to shore up some of our community priorities. But when we think about what the conversation that Councilmember Green and Chair Bankston just had about external factors, when we think about the budget issues that we see currently, and our hope that we budgeted enough for police overtime, our hope that we come in at 2%, we're doing a lot of hoping and wishing and dreaming and praying just to meet zero again when we know that what the auditor projected next year is less than what we actually finished with this year. And so for me, what I am asking of the chair for this year is to help us have an ongoing, open, deliberative, collaborative conversation, not just with you, but with our partners at the courts and others, so that we're not in this situation next year. I'm asking him, I think it's in my opinion, if we're going to take a vote on a budget that is this tight, knowing that we have this many finger cross items in them, that we need to see a task force that will help us get there before we start these conversations for the next budget. And so that would be my ask as we think through, and certainly as I vote on a budget that gets us to thank the Lordy, but we should be doing everything in our power not to be here next year. And I hope through a collaborative partnership between your office, the auditor's office, city council, and our other partners that we fund internally, that we can get there. And so again, I hope this is seen as in good faith and a way that council can be supportive of not focusing on issues, but focusing on solutions. And so again, thank you, Chair, thank you, colleagues, and thank you, Director, for your leadership.
Thank you, President Harden, for your continued trust in me and work that you continue to put on my plate. I appreciate it. But I agree with those sentiments, and I think that some of that work is being done and has to have that broader conversation. So thank you for that.
Chair, if I might, one moment, just to respond to that for a second. I just want to make sure that I'm stating for the record, and I think that we've talked about this directly. I think that it's not just finger crossed, hope nothing else happens. We know something else is going to happen. We see what the appropriations were for the departments that fund all of our human services related programs at the federal government. We see a $3.2 billion deficit in the state's Medicaid budget. We know they have a constitutional mandate to fill it. So we can pretty much know for certain that before the next budget cycle, there will be another shoe that drops, and probably another after that and another after that. And I think that's what my greatest concern is coming into this hearing. And I don't want to be a bad partner here, because I know, it's hard to make decisions when you really don't know exactly, precisely what's going to happen. But we have there's no net to catch us in the way that this budget is written, and it might not even be enough to cover all of our bills we already know we're going to have to pay. And I'm deeply concerned about it. I'm deeply concerned about how we're going to move in the middle of a budget cycle after we've already made the majority of our, large appropriation for the year, when we have limited access to resources to be able to be nimble, to be able to address the next CPH or the next Life Care Alliance or the next Primary One Health or the next Community Shelter Board or the next and the next and the next.
No, thanks, Councilmember. I mean, I would just say that, the funds at council's discretion for carryover could be brought to bear to address some of those needs. And I know that doesn't mean that there aren't other things that we have to address as well, but if that's the consideration and the concern, that's a potential as well. Thank you.
Councilmember Remy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Long, for enduring this discussion. Certainly, I echo the council president on this task force concept, and something that we could accomplish before we take this up again, because, hopes and dreams and those sorts of things are not a strategy. It is something that is deeply concerning with, how we get here, given the, obviously we understand the current environment, but we also know that we can't continue to operate like this. And I echo, Councilmember Weich when he talks about HR. I mean, that's one example of a significant deficiency in efficiency, because that is to have so many desperate HRs across the city that have massive staffs, in some cases utilities in and of itself. Would you say 52 people? Something like 50-ish. But to have those big staffs and all these departments, not only does it not, put forth policy, HR policy across the board that should be pretty consistent and standardized based on laws that are out there. It just creates, this multitude of staffing throughout every division. And so, that's just one example, and there's plenty others. Not anybody's fault, then it's just the way that things evolved over the years, but it is something that, we need to start recognizing as an opportunity for us to improve. So, there's been that discussion on our side. Do you think that a task force like that would be helpful?
Well, thanks, Councilmember Remy, I appreciate it. I did want to respectfully disagree with hopes and dreams. That's not all what's happening here in the administration and with the mayor. I mean, eliminating over 200 vacant positions and critical hiring only, and making real cost reductions in departments weren't hopes and dreams, with all due respect. They were real cost-saving measures that were implemented, and these were vetted with our rating agencies. And the city retained its AAA bond rating based on full disclosure of what we're implementing. And so it's not my opinion or of whether this is a good path. I believe that it is, but it's also others' opinions that we're on the right path. In terms of a task force, we're already, while we're always open to good ideas, we're already implementing a range of cost savings measures. We're awaiting, obviously, the recommendations of our FRAC committee. We don't know what those recommendations will be yet. I think that's something that we should all be considering before there are structural changes to any budget. We don't know what options may be available to the city to pursue for additional revenue sources. And so, thank you.
Maybe I came across too strong on the hopes and dreams, but the personnel thing, that is good, something that is important. But there were certain things within the budget that $1 million for the jail contract when it's been $2 million every single year, and that's not going to go down. So that's when I say, when there's pieces like that in there, it's hard for us to stomach some of the things, because it was a cut across the board without any discernment whether or not this is going to be reality or not. It's just that's what I meant by that. But can you talk a little bit about how vacancy credits are assumed for each department, and would this be a process that you'd consider adjusting in the future to increase some budgetary efficiencies?
Yes, we made some assumptions. It's about an additional 0.5% of personnel costs for the general fund, that we're going to continue to have positions, people exiting their position, right? From leaving the city, moving to another position, those create vacancies. And so in those, any vacancy that's created is going to require a real critical eye by all of us on the administration on whether that position's rehired. And so, yes, we plan on vacancy credits, collectively about $5 million worth of those, but that's something that we can control. The onboarding of additional personnel is not automatic. It's again, something that the mayor's office, finance, and human resources are going to scrutinize. And so I think that's a key part of rebalancing and moving out of this environment, is not only cutting the vacant positions, but how do we, without implementing layoffs, rebalance personnel. And I think it goes back to Councilmember Weish's point about how do we eliminate redundancies. I think that attrition can come from that type of exercise, right? Do we have duplicative functions, positions, and then how do we provide a path through attrition to rebalance those things?
One of the things in, technology is a great equalizer when it comes to personnel. We could go through a long list of inefficiencies within, say, the Division of Police because of the lack of technology or desperate systems, for instance. And so, I know myself and Chair Banks, and we've been pushing on investment in technology that creates not only just basic access to information that are spread across so many different systems. I guess the point is that and I say this because we are not known as being the advanced leaders in technology as a city. But, it's been my goal in every conversation that I have that we are pushing on directors to invest in that so that it's better not just for our own people, but for the constituents, our residents. A good example, the website got revamped. It's still not the communication portal that we need for our residents and our residents deserve. Putting in a police report, it takes an active, you might as well be a law enforcement officer to put in a police report online. It's so challenging. And that's something that we're working on with my Columbus Growth Package this year. But we need to be doing this so that we can bring some of these inequalities throughout these departments, make it so that people can work more efficiently and reach their goals. So I don't really have a question in regards to that, but I guess I wanted to just make the statement. So thank you, Chair. That's all I have.
No, and thank you, Councilmember Remy. I think you bring up a good point around particularly how we can better utilize technology when we think about some of the efficiencies as well. I do want to move quickly into, and want to thank all my colleagues and thank also our public speakers who are hanging in there with us. As you can see, when we talk about complex budgets like this, it can be a little time consuming. But with that, I want to move into amendments. So we talked, I think, at this point, our analysis of the budget. I think the administration's proposed budget. But as we have said, we've been going through this process and identifying amendments that we as council want to advance in this budget. I will briefly go through those, and then I will turn it over to Director Matt Erickson to help walk us through those in a little bit more detail, and as well as potentially, I think, ways that we are finding that we can address those amendments while also, I think, not having to do some draconian efforts that we've seen in other places. So what council is proposing or to move forward is a $7.2 million addition for the Community Shelter Board. That is in addition to what is already in the proposed budget of $5.7 million. An additional $3 million for the city's 27th day pay period. $1 million added back to restore the city's Elevate grant level programming that was from 2025. $1.8 million in FQHC funding directed towards Primary One. A $1.2 million restoration for the municipal court clerk's budget, $700,000 restoration for the municipal court judge's budget, and then lastly, proposing $5.4 million for ongoing joint administration and council programming in areas such as workforce development, public safety, housing, and other human services related efforts. So those are just some of the things I think that we've identified throughout our conversations and talks with the administration, as well as through these different budget hearings. So Director Erickson, I'll pass it over to you so we can see that displayed and I think talk through some of the efforts of how to fund those.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Bankston. So in terms of the dollars that council sort of evaluated for use for amendment purposes, this really constitutes what it was that was under consideration. There's one item that ultimately we didn't move forward with, but let me just walk through these. General fund carryover, the $5,033,300, that's a function of the year-end fund balance that the auditor certifies, which in itself is a combination of revenue coming in higher than expected, expenditures coming in, well, in this case, higher than expected. But the net result was about $5 million more in available resources. Council sub-funds, those are sub-funds of the general fund, in much the same way as the rainy day fund and 27th pay period fund are. These are funds that were established over a decade ago that tend to be used for spending activity for council initiatives, and there's a year-end cash balance in there of just under $1.9 million. What's identified here, might as well talk about them both together, CPH carryover and Rec and Parks carryover. Those two departments are uniquely constructed within the city in that the vast majority of the resources they receive comes in the form of a general fund transfer. Those funds are designed to start the year and end the year with $0. So essentially, if they end the year with cash in those funds, mechanically, we can recover those funds. You have two mechanisms. You can either increase appropriations to match within those departments and have no impact on budgetary operations, or you can reduce the general fund subsidy to those departments to effectively reconvert those to general fund dollars that can be reappropriated for other purposes. Cannabis revenue, we've discussed a couple of times. This is a special revenue fund that was created at the end of 2024 to receive receipts associated with adult use cannabis excise tax revenue. We didn't receive $1 of it for about a year and a half, and then in January we received all proceeds due to us between August 24 and November 25, which constituted about $4 million, and we're expecting to receive, $4.2 million, and we're expecting to receive another $3 million this year for total available funds of $7.2 million. What we colloquially refer to as the Easton Fund is associated with the renewal of the TIF ordinance out at Easton, for which one of the developers has been contributing about $750,000 a year for several years. That is largely intended to be used for housing-related initiatives, and just jumping ahead, that we're intending to use a portion of this to support additional resources for Community Shelter Board. What's called the Development Services Fund. This is the one that it was initially under consideration. This is the fund that supports the Building and Zoning Services departments, along with the general fund. Finance and the mayor's office, through this budget construction, understandably shifted general fund expenditures in building and zoning, a significant portion of those from the general fund onto the Development Services Fund. And so, as Councilmember Bankston sort of alluded to, I think we were able to accomplish what we needed to without being entirely too disruptive to operations. So Fund 2240 is not actually being utilized. And then lastly, the Opioid Recovery Fund, as Councilmember Green alluded to as well. This does have a cash balance at the end of 2025 of $4.1 million. There are some restrictions that govern the use of those dollars that require some further investigation about where those expenditures can realistically be applied, but we expect to utilize around $3 million of that in addition to the $1 million that Finance has mentioned that they're already intending to shift over from Columbus Public Health. And I want to note, I need to, there's some inside baseball here when it comes to the mechanics, and what you see on the next slide in terms of, what it is that council is committing to different funding sources. We're essentially creating additional general fund resources through some of these moves mechanically by shifting, for example, $5.3 million of the Elevate grants. Elevate in the proposed budget was $9 million, $5.3 million came from the general fund, $3.7 million from Hotel Motel Fund. We can shift that entire $5.3 million onto the cannabis fund, which we intend to do, and that essentially frees up $5.3 million in general fund resources that can be repurposed, similar to Rec and Parks and Columbus Public Health fund balances. In terms of how those are actually going to be applied, as Councilmember Bankston already discussed, Council's already made a $2 million commitment for 2026 for the Columbus Promise Program with an earlier amendment to the general fund. $7.2 million in supplemental support to Community Shelter Board will be split between the general fund and that Easton Fund. 27th pay period, $3 million deposit with general fund resources. The municipal court for both the judges and the clerk, additional general fund resources. The restoration of the $1 million for the Elevate grants will also go against marijuana revenues. Community priorities, as Councilor Bankston mentioned, shared priorities between council and the administration, general fund resources, and then primary one, the additional funding for primary one will likely utilize that year-end fund balance for Columbus Public Health, as well as a small portion of additional general fund resources. I think that's the extent of it, sir, if there's any questions.
Thank you, for the, I think actually I was going to ask some clarifying questions, but I think you hit many of them. But I do just want to point out, and I think it's a point of Councilmember Green, is that essentially what we are doing is really removing any buffer that we would have. And that's not missed, I think, on me or this body. But I do think that we wanted to take an approach that did not put us in a place of, I think, layoffs or cuts or those types of things that we could be facing like other cities. But I think that's why it's even more critically important as we talk about how we come together to look at ahead, 2027, so forth, and how we find more efficiencies and cost-saving measures. And also, I think, a healthy review of revenue sources into the city as well. We do have some public speakers, but before, were there any questions for my colleagues on the technical general fund and movement of monies in D365? Councilmember Green.
Two quick questions. First question, Director Erickson, is related to the opiate fund. I just want to ensure that any expenditures that come out of that fund are not going to impact any expenses that Columbus Public Health had anticipated using it for. For example, I remember in an earlier budget hearing, or maybe it was a briefing, they told me that they were planning on moving the SafePoint contract, our city's harm reduction program, under that fund line item. I know there were some unexpected things that arose with the medical record system. I'm truly not a huge proponent of using this, but I recognize I'm not, the one in charge of that, and we have things we have to do, but.
I can't speak to, Councilmember Green, can't speak to commitments that public health may have made. The difficult thing about the opioid fund, as we've kind of discussed, is that it is sort of quote unquote off book, and it's off budget. And so some of those traditional information sources might not be readily available. I can also tell you that it's a funding source that will continue to accrue revenue as a function of the One Ohio settlement. So, for quite some time, we're going to continue to receive revenues into that fund. I can't speak with expertise about how CPH specifically intends to utilize those dollars.
Well, sometime in the next, before we pass the budget, whenever that might be, if we can please maybe sit down with them and just make sure we're being good partners and make sure that we're not going to negatively impact any, life-saving services like our harm reduction services, I think would be important, and anything else that's going on there. And then I did just want to kind of loop back around to, and I understand, this is an interesting tension right now because we're talking about the budget, which we have to pass, but then, the administration also has to sort of like figure out how to implement things related to making sure that we're appropriating funds to, take care of folks. And I know it was a goal not to lay people off. I recognize with the CPH cut that if we don't have money to restore it, that there will be a workforce impact. I mean, that just, we can't print money. But I just want to make sure that I state it a little officially here that it cannot be those employees, in my perspective, that are doing life-saving work and providing services to 50% of Ohio's HIV positive population. So I don't know how we, move forward as we're looking at what resources are available to us to bridge that gap. But if not, I look forward to, working collaboratively. Anytime I've inquired about, if anyone has found a solution, I have been told thus far no, but I just wanted to do my due diligence to state that here.
Thank you, Councilmember. We will now move into public comment. Before moving to public comment, I'm sorry, Director, is there any comments that you wanted to make at all before we move to?
Thank you, Chair Banks. Just echo your sentiments that many of the funds and resources that were outlined just now by Director Erickson are flexible. They can serve as buffers. to deal with unknowns, fiscal unknowns throughout this year, including some of the concerns that Councilmember Green addressed about federal funding cutoffs and shortfalls. So you noted that, and just wanted to make sure I went on the record. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank our speakers for hanging in there with us. And so now we'll move to the public comment phase. As of today's 10 a.m. deadline, we received 2 requests for in-person testimony and 1 piece of written testimony from Dana Sims with Voice Corps. So I will move right into public testimony. And for first up, we have Sarari Lopez, and hopefully I said that correctly. And Ms. Lopez is representing the Ohio Hispanic Coalition, and thank you for being here. Welcome back to council. I think you all know the drill, 3 minutes, and good to see you.
Right. Good afternoon, Councilmember Bengtson and members of City Council. My name is Sarai Lopez. I'm a youth leader with the Juventud en Acción, a program of the Ohio Hispanic Coalition. In 2026 operating budget, the city highlights its commitment to 2 fundamental promises, safety and stability, and to ensuring that vulnerable neighbors are supported. Latino youth are part of those neighbors. Columbus' promised operating budget is approximately $1.26 billion, with millions allocated towards youth programming, including $16.7 million for summer programs and additional funding for after-school and early start initiatives. These investments matter, and we recognize the city's effort to support young people. But as Columbus grows, so does our Latino community. The Latino population in Columbus has increased significantly over the past decade, and nearly 1 in 10 youth in Franklin County identifies as Hispanic or Latino. As our numbers grow, access and intentional outreach must grow with us. When we talk about safety, it's not only about emergency responses, but also about prevention. Safety for Latino youth means access to culturally responsive programs, mental health support, and safe spaces where we feel understood. Many of us face pressure that aren't always visible. Some help translate our families, some balance school with responsibilities at home, some struggles with identity and belonging. Mental health is not just about a trend. It's a real and growing need among youth, especially those navigating multiple cultures and expectations. Through Juventud en Acción, we experience what safety and stability can look like. We gain leadership skills, confidence, and sense of belonging. We learn that when youth are supported by organizations that understand their culture and language, participation increases and impact deepens. That is why Latino-led organizations like the Ohio Hispanic Coalition are essential partners in fulfilling the city's promises. Investing intentionally in trusted, community-based organizations ensures that resources truly reach the youth they are meant to serve. It strengthens prevention efforts, promote mental wellness, and build future leaders for Columbus. If safety and stability are the city's promises, we respectfully ask that Latino youth be visible, included in how those promises are funded, measured, and delivered. We are not just asking to be supported, we are asking to be part of shaping the solutions. The future of Columbus is our future too. Thank you for your time and for your commitment to the youth of our city.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Lopez, and I want to thank the Ohio Hispanic Coalition for your continued advocacy in this chamber, both on this budget as well as in our efforts around immigration enforcement. You guys have been a strong voice that we hear loud and clear. As I want to reiterate that this body in this city knows that our Hispanic brothers and sisters are welcomed here. They are our residents, they are our neighbors, they are our brothers and sisters. And so we are going to continue to do what we can to ensure that there's collaboration and that we continue to make sure that you all are seen. You know, you mentioned some things around mental health funding, and that is very, very critical. And so I also want to make sure that our office connects so we can get you connected with Adam H. It is our Franklin County alcohol, drug, mental health addiction board here that governs a lot of that. And so I think there may be some collaboration and synergy there. So again, thank you for your advocacy.
Thank you.
And our final speaker is Ms. Tia Johnson with Fresh Bloom Bins. Ms. Johnson, welcome to council. Thanks for hanging in there with us.
We had a name change too. Good evening, Council, Bankson, and members of Council. Let me just start by saying, y'all, I done bumped my head. I started a small business. Not just any small business, I'm in the trash business. An industry where few women own companies, an industry where the barriers to municipal bids are stacked high. But here's what I've learned. Where systems stack barriers, we can stack solutions. I didn't just bump my head, I fell hard. And this city had programs, people, and resources that helped me get back up. Thank you. And while I'm still climbing back up, I learned to drown out the noise, to listen, and to ask questions. Because in some rooms, you're so overlooked, you're not even considered competition or collaboration. So they let you sit just to listen. And while being treated like a disposable or throwaway, I kept listening and I kept hearing the same thing. We have a trash problem. After hearing it over and over, I asked myself, what is trash, really? My mentor answered, trash is something someone decided it has no value. But in this world, in our world, and in this room, we know better. Trash is public health. Trash is workforce development. Trash is climate change. Trash is equity. Recycling is resource. So we don't just have a trash problem. We have an equity problem, an education problem, and a logistics problem. And that has led to illegal dumping, litter, and high recycling contamination rates. So we built something. The Clean Community Program. As a community partner, we stack solutions with savings, bulk stabilization, litter coordination, and education. Today, I'm asking Council to fund 0.02% from the general operating budget structured to multifamily waste solutions. Compare the Clean Community Program to the reactive approach, Snapples. The reactive approach compared to the current model. Because here's the truth. Right now, our local tipping fee is $39.99 per ton. In major cities like New York, the tipping fee exceeds $100 per ton. When landfill close, logistics change, costs rise. We will either invest now or pay later. Imagine what we can do together towards environmental stewardship. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Johnson. And if folks aren't familiar with your company, they should be. It's very, I think, innovative. Thank you for the recommendation as well. And I think you point out, I think, the situation we find ourselves in, that there are, I don't want to say competing interests, but there are a lot of interests that we have to undertake and think about as we contemplate this budget, but also forward-going budget. So I would encourage you to continue to engage with us, not just for this budget cycle, but for budget cycles going forward.
Thank you.
So thank you. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Okay. Well, we have come to the end. I would again want to thank folks for engaging with us. I do want to make sure I recognize that our municipal court clerk is here, Ms. Lori Tyack. Thank you for being here and sticking with us, and also for your advocacy, I think, throughout the budget process. You know, I just want to reiterate a couple of things that, you know, our role as the oversight body does not and should not end when we pass the budget. And I also want to be clear that this tonight is not an indictment per se on the administration. It is merely the reality that we find ourselves in. And so it is a conversation that we are having, and a continued conversation that will continue to happen. We are at a time when we need to work hand in hand with our administration partners to find solutions to the problems that are coming down the pipe. Despite the nation's worsening economic outlook, our revenues have continued to grow year after year, and it puts us in a very good position. But we know that this is not simply about revenue, it is also an expenditure problem. And we need to modernize the way that the city functions so that we can continue to find cost savings, but also, I think, meet the moment of a growing city and growing region. As with anything, the details and internal mechanics of a proposed task force or committee or otherwise, incredibly important. So this work, I will work with our director of our research office, Director Erickson, as well as our Department of Finance, the mayor's office, our auditor, and all, I think, stakeholders to come to the table as we look to talk about this task force and the timing and the roles of it. Regarding next steps, council will use the remainder of this week to prepare our proposed amendments for Monday's council meeting. As of right now, I still plan to bring the amended budget before council for a vote, and we want to move forward with that. Again, that being said, that is not the end of the conversation. And again, we remain committed to working to move forward and move our city forward. Are there any additional comments from my colleagues? Thank you again all for being here and hanging in with us. And that concludes tonight's hearing. Thank you.